Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football. Thought I'd change things up a little bit, do a show from the Falcons facility here at Flyer Branch, which I think is the first time I've ever done this. We have some time to kill today between some media stuff that's going on. Obviously a lot of people talking today ahead of the team's Thursday night nationally televised football game on Amazon against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a division battle that we thought was going to be kind of a key game in deciding the NFC South before the season got started, but obviously it's more of a lame duck for the Falcons this time around. Raheem Morris said yesterday that they want to basically play spoiler. That's what they're playing for, on top of other things, obviously, their own jobs and future contracts, that kind of thing. But as far as what they have to play for as a Falcons team, unfortunately, it is just to basically play spoiler this season. So anyway, thought it would be a nice little time to do a show right now. And if you've been following me on Twitter, you will have seen over the last couple of days I've been diving into some stats, some interesting stats, some maybe concerning stats. Let's talk about them though. First of all, some of the third down stuff. It's obviously been a big problem. Against the Seahawks, the team was 1 for 13 on third downs. That is the worst marks the Falcons have had in a game since, I believe, 1991. I know Torrey McElhaney had the exact stat just after the game that day, but that is obviously absolutely terrible. Overall this season, the Falcons are second to worst in the NFL converting on third downs. The only team worse than them is the Tennessee Titans, who were right here in training camp for joint practices. But obviously the Titans are a team that's struggling mightily. They're in position to have the first overall pick once again this coming NFL draft. And it's obviously a statistic that is not, we shouldn't even say not conducive to being a playoff team or a winning team, but it's kind of a non-starter. It's untenable. You cannot be that poor on third down and also be a successful football team in the NFL. So that's bad. Maybe even worse is their overall EPA per play. And by the way, EPA per play is just, it's a metric that's just the all-encompassing how good are you. Like the estimated points added is what EPA stands for. It's just a generic value of a given play, and the Falcons are the worst EPA per play of any team in the NFL on third downs, even worse than the Tennessee Titans. So not good at all. And I asked Raheem Morris about that last stat specifically in his press conference that he did yesterday, and his response was that it's really, and I would have to go back to the quote and see if, I don't think he said anything specifically about like the third down plan that they have, the scheme that they have in those situations. He said that, quote, it's down to that dog making that dog play. And, obviously I think the Falcons, they don't have the dogs, so to speak, in terms of when you look at that receiver room, who they've got out there in comparison to the rest of the NFL. But I don't know, it's hard to justify. Well, I shouldn't say, it is what it is. But also, Raheem Morris would tell you that they have all these great players on offense. And he talks about having Bijan, Tyler Algier, Kyle Pitts. And, they have said that they're confident in the receivers that they have going out there and the depth that they have in that room. And always trying to add to it and all that kind of stuff. But then it's kind of mixed messaging in my mind when you hear him say that, Raheem Morris say that they just have to have their players actually make the plays that are there to be made. And I think that like we said, that's obviously true. But I think where a lot of Falcons fans, and if I'm going to say myself in particular, would kind of disagree with this sentiment, is that the scheme could be a lot better. It feels like there's an opportunity for a lot more easy yards, put your quarterbacks in situations where they have simpler reads. Obviously now you have Kirk Cousins, but prior you had a young quarterback in Michael Penix, or an inexperienced quarterback at least in Michael Penix, and it just felt like life could have been easier for him in certain situations. Also, are the Falcons offensive coaches preparing best for what to expect? Are they getting what they expected to see in some of these third down situations? Because third down is such a huge, obviously, part of football and being a good football team. But for these coaches who are out here at the training facility, I mean, they spend an entire day of practice every week basically just working on third downs, offensively and defensively, and they have specific schemes, specific calls that they work on the practice field and that they like to go to when they get into these situations. And obviously it's not working for this Falcons team, has not worked for them so far this season, and it's hard to really honestly see a turnaround happening, barring, Drake London coming back and him being that dog who's able to make some of those plays. But to me, in my mind, if you're a good third down team, it's not just because you have great players, it's because the coaches are putting those players in situations to succeed that are relatively easy, that they can consistently accomplish, and that you're not just asking for these great plays to be made by players on given plays. Also was digging into some stuff regarding pistol versus under center. I was really just kind of looking at all kinds of different splits. Obviously, third down was a split that really stood out, and we kind of understand how much the Falcons have struggled in that area this year. But obviously, the pistol versus under center conversation has been one that's been discussed a lot. I've talked about it a lot on the podcast and radio hits I do on 92.9 The Game. And I thought it was interesting and kind of went against some of my prior notions of what I thought about the pistol and under center and how effective they are. Notably, well, we'll get into the passing in a second. Let's start with the rush, which is interesting because I've always felt like the under center running game is much more effective because you give your linemen better angles at plays, the timing works out a little bit better. But actually, it's not necessarily true, at least for the Falcons this year. In fact, they've been better on EPA by about double. I think they're negative 0.5 EPA per rush under pistol versus minus 0.12. I don't have the numbers in front of me. They don't really matter. Basically, they're like 12th in the NFL in EPA per rush in pistol versus I think like 25th in the NFL in EPA per rush when they're under center. Obviously, a much smaller sample size being under center in both the run and the pass, as we're going to talk about in a second, just because they've really gone more under center and have a decent sample at least to go off of because Kirk Cousins has come into the fray and clearly I think is more comfortable in that setup. But interesting that in the run game in the pistol was not necessarily bad. I don't know if you would say it was necessarily good either, but it wasn't necessarily bad. And I think that for any shortcomings this team has had in the rush game versus what was expected, it's probably less about the under center pistol dynamic than it is about not having Caleb McGarry and just not having some of the personnel that you've wanted at times. Obviously, you've had some key offensive linemen banged up as well. Jake Matthews had that ankle, I believe it was, and Chris Lindstrom has had a foot. So you just haven't kind of been in ideal condition. Obviously, every team is going to deal with injuries along their offensive line, but the Caleb McGarry one, it is a big deal. I mean, if you look at what they gained EPA-wise running to their right side while they've had Lindstrom and McGarry together, it's been some of the best in the NFL, and that's really, I think, what's taken some of that oomph out of the Falcons' run game. But I think it's interesting to see in the passing game how things are different. So here, let me just give it to you straight up, and then we'll just talk about some of the takeaways. When this team runs a pass play from under center, they have the third best EPA per pass in the NFL. That's pretty impressive. Pistol, it's not some major drop off. They're 10th in the NFL. That's still very good. That's where you would want to be. And then interestingly, since I was looking at these shotgun, when they're lined in shotgun on passing plays, they're the third worst team in the NFL. So what are my takeaways from these numbers? One, the play action game from under center works, and it works. It offers the Falcons the best passing play opportunities. Now, I do want to caveat this with the fact that we saw that, well, first of all, the under center sample size is generally small to begin with because of what we talked about earlier with Kirk Cousins coming in. He's really the only one who's done much under center stuff. And he had that big play action touchdown pass to Darnell Mooney from an under center play. And so that play probably has an outsized impact on just the overall under center passing plays and the EPA because they've run so few and that was such a high EPA play. But it is, I just want to kind of put that out there. I do think though in general that the play action from under center does lead to some of the Falcons' most successful passing plays. But the play action in general, I think that's what this speaks to. I mean, when you look at when they're in pistol, which by the way, when they're in pistol, they're still running it like 80% of the time. So it's still like pistol and under center can kind of be seen as the same, just like a different a modification of the same alignment. and that's completely different from shotgun, where shotgun, they're like passing 80+% of the time out of that alignment, and that is where they really struggle. So what these numbers tell me is that, one, play action under center, very good. Play action in general, very good. But the pure passing game, when teams are expecting you to pass, and you know that teams are expecting you to pass, you still need to complete something, they're terrible. That's basically what that suggests to me. And it's not like I put this out there and people were saying, oh yeah, see, like the pistol's like is better than under center. I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. That was not my takeaway, was that like the pistol is actually better than under center or worse than under center. I think, when I reflected on the numbers, it was probably better than I expected it to be, but overall, to me, this is actually a story about the play action passing game, and the fact that the play action just helps the passing game and helps the quarterback basically find his open receivers down the field and an ability to be successful. So just some interesting numbers there. Now, to wrap up the show today, do want to kind of continue this conversation that we've had about, what this Falcons regime is going to be going forward. It feels like as we've gotten away from Sunday, maybe as tends to happen, I don't know if this is like, media members kind of talking to media members on the side with what they think is going to unfold based on, I don't know, vibes, what they've heard, et cetera, et cetera. It feels like there's this growing notion that Raheem Morris I'm trying to say this accurately. Raheem Morris will stay as Falcons head coach next year, basically. Let's put it bluntly like that. I'm still not so sure that will be the case, but that seems to be the growing notion here over the last couple of days since we've gotten away from Sunday. And again, we talked about this in that post-game show where I'm not sure if that's just kind of a growing notion because it's almost a fear that some people have. Like from what I've heard, people who say that, I don't even know if they necessarily think it's in the best interest of the Falcons, but just that they think that that's something that is more likely to happen than not going into next year. Personally, for me, just objectively speaking, I don't think it's the most likely thing still, even at this point. But I thought that, I wanted to kind of pick up on a topic along these lines that my colleague at 92.9 and friend of the show, Bo Morgan, one of the guests that we had on before the season started, was talking about, which is that, one of the reasons why you would want to keep Raheem Morris on board is because you do want to establish at least some stability within the organization. And I think what he espoused on the morning shift, I believe it was it was sometime this week, I believe it was on Monday, is that, if you're just making another change, then you're just kind of setting yourself back to an extent with a new coach who has to once again learn the personnel, the players, what they're good at, and adapt and kind of have that adaptation period that we've seen this staff certainly have with the players that were amassed mostly under Arthur Smith's regime. And, I do think that there is some validity to that argument in general. I think that in general, you should be looking for stability. And I don't think in an NFL setting with just how complex the organization is and how complex the scheme is, and how you build a good performing NFL team, I think there is validity to having that stability. But in my opinion, and I've talked about this with another friend of the show, Mark Zinno, and I know that this is not a popular opinion amongst Falcons fans, I think that the time for stability was with Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith was tasked with overseeing a full teardown and rebuild, about as big as we've seen this Falcons organization have in decades. With that 2022 team, after you lost Julio Jones and Matt Ryan, they really had to rebuild things, and then the Calvin Ridley replacement for Julio Jones, that also kind of went tits up. So you had to really rebuild. And when you look back to that 2022 team, I mean, that was a team that was absolutely patched together by the seams, and they still put up 7 wins that year. I mean, they weren't mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, I believe, till maybe 2 games left in the season. Maybe the second to last game of the season, they still had a chance at making the playoffs, which is saying a lot. I mean, I was actually just thinking about that roster. The safeties were Richie Grant and Jalen Hawkins. You had Michael Walker starting at linebacker. He was like the green dot wearer. Like, it was rough. Obviously you had Grady Jarrett, but I'm just trying to think of more players off the top of my head. It was an overmatched roster, and they did well with that. Now, that led into 2023. Then the team was able to spend on free agency. They were able to bring in Calais Campbell, Jesse Bates. They were able to bring in some key veterans, David Onyemata, another one, that were really able to help. The goal, was to get into the playoffs with these players, but I think even more fundamentally, they were supposed to establish what was the core of the veteran base of that roster. Maybe not so much Calais Campbell, because he was, an aging veteran. You knew he was going to be more of a short-term player, but still, the kind of culture that he was going to help be able to establish just with his personality and who he is coming into the building was very important. And Arthur Blank goes into the press conference room, that training camp, and says, we expect to make the playoffs with all these signings that we've made. We've got a young quarterback, but we believe in him. That was Desmond Ridder. I think that when it comes to the Arthur Smith tenure, I think a lot of people, assume that was all like Arthur Smith's idea, that Arthur Smith went to Terry Fontenot and anybody else in the front office and said, listen, like, I like Ridder, we can make it work with him. I think that there is an element of truth to that, but when we talk about, the personnel here, Terry Fontenot and the head coach, how often do you hear them talking about, everything's a collaboration, it's collaboration. And in this sense, I do think that there was some collaboration that happened between Terry and Arthur Smith when it comes to, okay, what decisions are we going to make at quarterback? Who do we want to try to bring in to make us successful? It's worth noting that, between 2022 and 2023 was really a dearth of quarterback options out there. Really the only one, well, the big one was obviously Lamar Jackson, but he was never really available. The reason, basically the Ravens had this, non-exclusive franchise tag on him, basically to allow the market to set his price so that they could finally agree on something, because they just could not agree on what the fair price was for him. And so there just weren't that many options, and I think that they probably came together and said, let's go with Desmond Ridder. We'll see if he can develop into something. If not, we'll also sign someone who has veteran experience in Taylor Heineke to be the backup. And ultimately, the worst case scenario unfolded, which was that Desmond Ridder was not the guy, and the organization, including Arthur Smith, knew that halfway through that season. Probably by the time they pulled him off the field at halftime against the Titans of that season was the moment that everybody knew that Desmond Ridder was not a long-term solution for them. And then obviously just didn't really work with Heineke either when he came into play, and so it all kind of went off the rails from there. Mood soured, everything got a little bit toxic, and the move was made at the end of the season. And I'm not saying it was necessarily if you were saying, do I think they should have fired him or kept him around? I think that they should have kept him for one more season to see when they could actually go out and spend on quarterback, like they ended up doing with two quarterbacks, which is a whole different kind of conversation, can of worms to open. But I thought that was the time to kind of hold your water and have some stability. At this point, again, I mentioned it, I said this line after the game on Sunday, but this is the Falcons going for it. This is the Falcons basically fully invested into this roster. There's not a lot of cap space. There's going to be more cap space freed up this year, and the Falcons may have to make some tough decisions to free up some more cap space to kind of lay the groundwork for what they want to do going forward. But it feels like this is not going to be a full teardown the way that 2022 was, but it is going to be at least some tough decisions made so that you can retool in a couple of years. So that there is going to be some sort of building process that starts to happen here. And that's where I get to the point where it's like, that's where I think change is a valid response to the failures that we've seen over the last 2 years. Because remember, like I said, in 2023, Arthur Blank went into that press conference room saying he's expected to make the playoffs. That was because he thought that roster was good enough to make the playoffs under Arthur Smith, and they did not accomplish that goal. They did not fulfill their objectives. That season was a failure, make no mistake about it. But so have both of these last two seasons, and not only have they been failures, but we've really seen the team regress this year in the second year, where you should be expecting the team to be building and going forward. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this, the frustration that we're seeing from some of the players, just in the way that, they're clearly dejected in having, in being in this position now where they have nothing to play for except for, as Raheem Morris said, playing spoiler. And so, like, I want to use an example of the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots, who had hired Gerard Mayo after Bill Belichick to kind of succeed Bill Belichick. Mayo had been the kind of perceived coach in waiting for a long time, got that role, and the Patriots stunk. They stunk it up. And did they fire Mayo because they kind of foresaw the ability to sign Mike Vrabel? I don't know. I'm not like, obviously tuned into that extent at the organization, but I would say that they were decisive in making a move that they thought was going to bring them more success and kind of lead them back to what they would, call that kind of Patriots way. And I think that that's where, like, the Falcons, they kind of need to find their Falcon way. Like, they need to find that identity. It's something we've been talking about on this podcast. But I think that this is well, I think it's actually a similar situation where, to me, I don't see a reason to persist with this, that they're kind of on the verge of breaking through and establishing that Falcon way under this regime, or like that players are just a little bit away. Like, we're just not seeing that improvement from the team on the field that would lead you to think that they're close, that they're on the verge of something greater. So I think the logical move is to go out there and find a coach that will bring you those things and that will help establish that culture. Again, we talk a lot about this, like, establishing culture, and the thing is, it's not going to be down to one coach, to one front office move, to one player that you sign, even if it is Calais Campbell, who's like a great culture builder, but it's going to be kind of all of those things and even more in the way that the organization goes forward onto the football field, into the community, all these things. So there's a lot to work on in that respect, but to me, I just don't see it happening under this coaching regime. As much as I like, Raheem's awesome with us, like, he's great. I know you guys probably don't like a lot of the answers that he gives, and sometimes I'm rolling my eyes at some of the answers, but as a person, like, I really enjoy all these people, but it's just not about that. Obviously, what we're focused on here on this podcast is trying to determine how best the Falcons can get back to, winning football games like we all want to see. So with that said, we'll get out of here for this week. Probably won't get another one of these out until the game is on Thursday, when we will come back to you guys with as our usual instant reaction. So stay tuned for that Thursday night or going into Friday. Thank you guys so much for listening. You can watch the show on 92.9 The Game's YouTube channel. If you're doing that right now, go ahead and click like on the video, and so that way you'll kind of get more of these. You can also click subscribe on 92.9 The Game's channel, and you'll get a lot more of Falcons content and other Atlanta sports content, where the show, Dukes and Bell doing like behind the curtain, little kind of podcast, 20-minute podcast type thing, kind of setting the table for the day. It's a good listen to. I listen to it every day. And if you want to listen to this show on podcast form, just search Joe Patrick on football wherever you get your podcast, and we'll talk to you Thursday.